Okay guys, I've seen some ridiculous builds in my time, but this is one build that I think is so strong that anyone using this simple setup can make not just this build, but any build in the game twice as good, and any piece of content in the game 10 times easier. And if you're not using builds with a setup like this in endgame content, even if you're not using solar, then I hope I can convince you guys to give this a shot and hear me out. So just to be clear as well guys, the background gameplay is a Master Nightfall whilst capped underpowered solo, just to give you a feel of how this build works. But what's basically happening is I'm using a Void Warlock, my Contra build to be specific, and I'm able to go about my day using my Void build to get faster grenades, Devour, volatile rounds if I decide to use a Void heavy weapon, and I'm also able to weaken enemies with my grenade. But on top of this, I'm able to scorch enemies and get Radiant, and be able to stun both barrier and unstoppables without even having any of the mods this season. So I'm not only getting the debuff from the weakening grenade, but I'm also stacking that DPS with Radiant too, so having both a debuff and a buff whenever I want. But the majority of the time you're going to have Radiant more than whatever your build would normally give you. For me that's Devour and weakening grenades, but if you're fast at killing, you will be able to maintain all buffs and debuffs at the same time, non-stop. Now this is working because of the exotic weapon Polaris Lance, and you don't even have to use Polaris Lance, any solo weapon will work, but I found that this is the most effective, especially when it comes to dealing with champions, because using Polaris Lance, precision hits return ammo, so you can just keep hitting things like a barrier non-stop with that scout rifle from a range until they die, and basically take the easy approach. And you might think, well, we don't have anti-barrier scouts, so how does this work? Well, in the artifact we have two perks. Flint Striker, rapid solar weapon precision hits and rapid solar weapon final blows grant Radiant, and then by being Radiant, our solar weapons will scorch enemies using Kindling Trigger, but by scorching enemies, they will eventually ignite, and that is if our Rays of Precision from our precision final blows hasn't blown them up already. And this is important because the Radiant we get, it's not only giving us a 25% damage buff, but it's also going to stun anti-barriers, and then the ignition effects we get are going to stun the Unstoppables. So that's how we stun those two champs. But the way you would use the build is you would start by getting Radiant, so in easy content that would be just by getting rapid solar final blows, or in harder content just keep shooting crit spots and we'll eventually get Radiant, and that's basically going to empower our solar weapons. And if you're playing a GM, this ain't going to be an issue, you're always going to be hitting those crits because of how much health ads have in general, and that's basically all there is to it. You just then apply this setup with those artifact perks and the weapon of your choice to your chosen build. For me, it's my Void Warlock, so I'll just be using a Vortex Grenade, the Chaos Accelerant and Feed the Void aspects, and then these 4 fragments with Echo of Undermining to weaken enemies. And then I'm just running that setup with the Contraverse Hold, so I can get as many grenades thrown down as possible. They did rework a lot of mods and the cooldowns, which to be honest, I can slightly feel the difference with this one. I don't know if it's just the rework or if Contraverse Hold just had a stealth nerf, but it just doesn't feel as strong as it was last season. But that's all I got for you guys today. Just apply the solar weapon setup to your build and I can promise you, it'll do you a lot of favours.